Abyssal Murmurs. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the next horror stories. Story 1, Morning. This story was told to me by my brother-in-law. It's a bit long, but I promise you, it is pretty scary. I don't know the names of the two people in this story, so we'll name them as we go along. This story took place in Thailand about 6-7 years ago. My BIL had relatives who lived in Thailand. A not too old loving couple got into a horrible accident, and that's when the nightmares began. We'll name the husband Meng and the wife Pajay. One unfortunate day while going to the garden/work, Meng and Pajay got into a horrible car accident. The car had flipped off the road, sending Pajay and Meng flying down a rock/stone-filled hill. Meng died at the scene while Paj was taken to the hospital with serious injuries. Unfortunately, Pajay fell into a coma due to her injuries. While in her coma, the family and relatives had already taken care of and finished the funeral services for Meng. A few months had passed, and fortunately, Pajay had finally woken up from her coma. The family decided it was best not to tell her about her husband since she had just woken up and still needed to recover. So they lied to her, telling her that her husband is well and at home waiting for her. After being well enough to be released from the hospital, Pajay had finally made it home only to find her husband was nowhere to be found. The family finally told her truth. Sadly, Pajay did not take the news very well. She cried and cried her eyes out. She'd visit the grave and mourn her feelings out there. Morning, day, and night. All she would do is sit by the doorbed and mourn for her dead husband. But everything took a sharp turn very soon after. One day, while sitting by the door mourning for her dead husband, she noticed something shaking the tall grass near the house. In Thailand, there are many tall grass, trees, etc. from the woods or grass plains in the mountains, and their house is on the edge of town where there are lots of tall grass and next to the woods. It caught her attention since an odd figure started to form its way out of the tall grass. The more she focused on it, the more it started to resemble a human-like creature. Paige stopped mourning now, and all her attention was on this thing near the grass. As she paid more close attention to it, she finally noticed what she had been staring at was a human on all fours. Dark, rotten face, staring right back at her. Paige froze in fear. No one was home since everyone left to the garden. This person thing started to make its way out of the grass and towards where she was sitting. She could now make out the face. It was her dead husband. Paige could not move a muscle, nor could she let out a single cry. Her dead husband started to crawl on all fours towards her. He slowly opens his mouth, with blood dripping down, the rotten tongue sticking out. He moans out, "Kojay, Kojay, Kwajay, Kwajwa wow, Kov, Kob Kwabu, Kaldo, Kaos, Gojos, Kojay Nyam, Losnog Kuv Mosas." Dear wife, you keep crying for me, so I have come back to take you with me. Dear wife, come with me. The dead husband finally crawled his way over to her, laid one hand on her arm, and began to drag Pajay with him. Pajay, now able to muster what little strength she could, finally let out a scream at the top of her lungs. Neighbors rushed to her aid, and that thing was now gone. A few days passed since that incident. Paige no longer mourns for her dead husband, but instead fears him. For a few days she could not talk or explain what had happened. Everyone thought she had gone crazy since losing her husband. They had a Nijay, Jingle Bells shaman ritual for Pajay, but it did not help at all. It just got worse from here on. Pajay could not sleep alone. or be left alone during any time of the day. As long as she closes her eyes, she could then smell the rotten stench and hear the dead husband's breathing right next to her. Every single night, Paige would hear scratching noises outside of her bed and hear a voice calling out, Koje Niam, Koj Niam Olos. Dear wife, come. One day, Paige was able to fall asleep due to countless days and nights of being sleep deprived. The family thought it was okay now, since she was able to sleep, and they decided to leave her alone in her room. Within minutes of falling asleep, Paige felt something pinch her arm so hard that it bled. She immediately woke up in fear and pain. When examining her, her arms and legs were pinched multiple times. Her face had been licked with blood. It got so serious, to the point where they had to call Paige's sister, we'll call her May, home from school to stay with her since she is a Christian. They thought that might help. Mai does not believe in ghosts except for one's own demons, but that soon changed. The first 2 nights were okay. They both were able to sleep just fine until the 3rd night. This particular night started off just like any other night. As Paige and May were about to fall asleep, Mai had just noticed how quiet it suddenly got outside, and the air around them changed. There was a slight foul stench, and the air grew colder above them. They both heard noises right on top of the roof above their bedroom, but thought nothing of it, thinking it might be small night critters. A good hour or 2 went by, and Paige was woken up to some fluid dripping onto her face. As she wiped her face, she noticed it was not water, nor was it saliva. It had the smell of blood. Shocked and terrified, she turned on a small lamp/flashlight and immediately regretted doing so. Paige, now frozen in fear and unable to move, could only watch as her dead husband was staring right down at her from the top of the ceiling with a bloody grin on his face. The air grew colder, and the foul stench grew stronger and thicker. The dead husband now slowly crawling his way from the ceiling, still wearing that horrible bloody grin, now to the wall and onto the floor right in front of Paige. About to grab her hand, moaned out, Kojniam rog kovmas os. Dear wife, come with me. What seemed like an eternity ended in an instant when Mao screamed at the top of her lungs, alerting everyone in the house. Maui had witnessed the whole thing. While still a Christian, Mao still agreed to Aniji to change her and Paige's name. Paige now converted to Christianity. It made her feel better and safer that way. Since the name change, she has now been living in peace. At least, that's what I've been told since then. I don't know how she is as of today. There were more encounters with the dead husband, but it's too long. I don't want to bore you all. Story 2. It had been 2 years since I'd left Nepal and traveled to Europe to pursue my higher education, finally settling down in London. Due to a series of unfortunate events, I became addicted to cannabis and other drugs. Well, I have to admit that time was both fun and had some dark moments. Nonetheless, I decided to quit everything and go back to Kathmandu, my hometown in Nepal. I was slowly recovering from my addiction, and after so long, I had my family and friends who kept cheering me and strongly supported me. My father then suggested me to go and live in our farmhouse for one particular weekend, which was in the outskirts of the city. I will tell you the description of the house. The house stood between the highway and a farm that my dad owned. It faced the highway. It was a traditionally made 2 stories, wooden house with steel tin as the roof. The ground floor had a hall, kitchen, and bathroom, while the top floor had 3 small rooms. A family from a nearby village used to take care of the house and the farm. The nearest market from this place was around 10 miles far, and our nearest neighbor lived at least a mile further than the house. I took up my dad's advice and invited 4 of my friends and their 3 girlfriends. This was not the first time I was going to stay in that house. My sister and I have spent dozens of our short and long vacations here in the past. One particular Friday afternoon of 2011, 8 of us packed our bags and traveled to that place. When we reached, our caretaker welcomed us warmly and helped us settle down. After the dinner and a small drinking session, I didn't drink whatsoever. The couples decided to go for a walk. My single friend and I stayed back as they wanted some privacy. The ladies were given one room, and we, gentlemen, shared the other 2 rooms. The caretaker slept in the hall, ground floor. We chatted for some time and then went to sleep. My other friend went to the other room as he had kept his stuff there. I didn't get any sleep and turned on my iPod. I listened a couple of songs, and when I chose to play Hallowed Be Thy Name by Iron Maiden, something strange happened. The song started, but it skipped some riffs and verses. At first, I thought either the iPod had hung or I forwarded by mistake and replayed the song. But again, the same thing happened. The song stopped in between and a shallow, growling voice started to play. I switched the iPod off that very moment and started to wonder. Then, when my eyes went out of the window toward the farm, I saw a naked kid, aged around 10-12, standing about 200 meters from home and staring directly at my eyes and disappeared. I couldn't take it anymore and gave a loud cry. My friend and our caretaker came running to my room and calmed me down. As I was relating this incident to them, one couple came back from walk, listened what I narrated. Shortly after, everyone came back and we all slept together in the hall. Next morning, I hiked to that particular point while cleaning my teeth. I noticed something was buried there. I rushed back to my caretaker, and he explained to me that some local villagers secretly bury their dead ones in the farm. He also told me that my father knew about it, but he was not taking any actions against it. The caretaker further told me that he has also experienced something unusual in the past, and that's the reason he never sleeps in that house unless someone from our family came there to stay. He came in the morning, finished his work, and went back to his house in the village. We returned back the very day and told my dad about it. He didn't believe it at first, but later started to believe, and he sold the entire property to some builders. I actually want to know the connection between my iPod and the sight I saw. Story 3. My little cousin, age 14, blows Kiji for the funeral and always stays late past midnight until he is done playing his part. Then he would get to come home. He didn't know how to drive, so my auntie and uncle would always pick him up when he called them. This one night when my little cousin was at the funeral, my auntie and uncle got a call from him saying he was done and to come pick him up. He didn't have his own phone, so he usually had to borrow someone's to call them. When they got there, my auntie and uncle decided to stay for a bit at the funeral and find my little cousin. Then they would all go together to the car. They stayed there for a good 10 minutes by the cooking/food area and didn't see my little cousin throughout the 10 minutes. Then right when they decided to get up and was about to go look for him to go home, there he was coming right at them saying, "Let's go home." As they got outside to the car, my little cousin got inside and shut the door. They had a big Odyssey van also. The ride home was more quiet, because when they asked him about how the funeral was, they got no response. So they thought my little cousin was too tired and just fell asleep all the way in the back seat or something. When then they got home, they said, Lay tuxog tsevos, saw. Lay, we have arrived home. Wake up. Lay. Short for Alex. He's the last boy also. So he was very loved and spoiled. When they told him to wake up because they were home, they already heard movement like someone getting up from the back seat. And when they opened the door for him, he didn't come out. My uncle peeked inside, and he was nowhere to be found in the back seat. My auntie thought he was mad, so he hid back in the trunk area. My auntie opened the back, and he wasn't there either. They looked everywhere around the car and looked by the house door to see if he had already walked to the door. My auntie and uncle got freaked out and thought he was mad for waiting too long, so he probably ran somewhere to go hide. They had no more idea where he could have been because they looked everywhere already, and still they were nowhere to be found. After a good 20 minutes of looking, they had finally decided that they were going to call the cops. Right before they could even call the cops, they got a phone call from my little cousin saying he was ready for them to go pick him up. When they got that call, their hearts dropped. They both were shocked and said it felt just like deja vu. By that time, my auntie and uncle's heart already a little scared. They wondered who was the one that got in the car with them and called them. When they got back to the funeral, my little cousin was already outside waiting for them. He got in and complained of how tired he was and kept on talking and talking. My uncle and aunt asked if he had called a while ago, and he said, no, he just got done and just called them now. The question's us, are we alone sometimes? And is it really who we see when we see someone? Story 4. My parents always told us to not pick up stuff on the streets because you don't know who it belongs to. If your parents ever told you anything like this, I'd advise you to listen, youngins. I lost my mom in 7th grade due to cervical cancer. She battled it for 3 years before it took a toll on her body. Well, when I was in 6th grade, my older brother and I had just transferred to a new school together. Our bus stop was about 4 blocks away from the house. That morning, as we were on our way to the bus stop, there was a trail of pennies. Yes, you read that right. A TRALOFPENNIAS. I don't know how it happened, but it happened. My older brother had this great idea that we should pick it up and bring it home to our parents. They kept a change jar. I didn't think twice. I picked up the whole trail of pennies. Every last one. I kept it in my pockets the entire school day and brought it straight home to my mom as my dad was already at work. She was sick, but she smiled and told me to put it in the change jar in their closet. Since then, she kept telling us about the person she saw in the closet, how he had such long, hairy hands, how he would sometimes try to reach out and touch her, or sometimes he'd stand there and just stare at her. She would always see him in there. I know it's not the cause of my mother's death, but sometimes I cannot help but to feel guilty that my younger, idiot self did that. She passed a year later and everyone tells me it's not my fault and that she's always been sick, but I can't help but to blame myself a little. If your parents ever told you not to do something, don't do it. Story 5. The THANK. Why are you? Recommendation. Listen to Maya Vu's song Niem Tuznaxiag en Stig before / during reading this. This is a very long story. Please bear with me. On November 1, 2016, at approximately 3:34 p.m., it was a beautiful, sunny, and dry afternoon when I had just gotten off of work. On my way home, I received a call from my brother. I never would have thought this call would bring such an impact to my life. I need you to come to Mom's house. Mom passed away. I immediately froze. I felt as though my heart had literally stopped. My breathing too felt as though it had stopped. My vision became blurry. My mind began clouded. I felt numb. I had probably driven through a red light without even realizing it. The phone slipped through my hands. I was in disbelief and denial. My mother's home was only a couple miles down the road, so I got there shortly after the call. I opened the door and saw everyone sitting and standing around, some grieving and some calling relatives to pass the news. It felt as if everything was mute. I stood by the door, still with disbelief in a state of shock. I stood like a statue, still trying to pick up all the pieces until a figure in the blur of my vision came closer to me and touched my shoulder. Its touch somehow instantly brought me back to reality. Grieving and talking over another became louder. My vision became clearer. It was as if someone had turned up the volume. I wished so badly that it was just a dream. A couple days later, the money folding began. We had relatives and friends over, some to show support and some to assist. We were planning on how we were going to make ends meet with the funeral and who was taking what role. I volunteered to do a brief slideshow of my mother because I had access to files of old memories of my mother. I also never would have thought that the moment I opened the video editor program that it would be one of the hardest challenges I would face. I had chosen Mayavwe's song, Niam Tuznexiag Enstig, as the background music, and every time I would review the video, the song would play, and it would always touch me with such agony. Every photo, every video, it reminded me not only of the past, but also of what I had just lost. Every single night, I had spent hours after hours, and every single time I opened up the program, tears would roll down my face. In the brief video, it consisted of slideshow photos and videos. It didn't just focus on her. It focused on memories of our family, the places we visited, the excitements, the laughters, and the gatherings. I intended to present not only of who guests, relatives, and friends were intending to pay their respects and condolences to, but also to see the strength and love our family has for one another. It had been a couple days after the burial. The sound of the kiji, a hum instrument, and drums still lingered in my head. I heard it when I thought and slept. I was restless and exhausted. I was not able to get a full sleep, nor was I able to eat a full meal. I became ill. It was after the third night I encountered the dream. At the time, we lived in a duplex which consisted of 3 rooms and 2 bathrooms. We had modified the basement and made available a 4th room. In the basement was my bed, a family sofa, and a 60 TV. I sometimes sleep on the sofa on accident while watching TV. The night I had THEDREAM, I was asleep on my bed. Now, the start of my dream. In my dream, I had woken up to a strong presence. I felt uneasy. I was still ill. I had gotten up out of bed in pitch dark. I was going to go take some medicine. Keep in mind, I was still in my dream without realizing it. I walked up the stairs and opened the door leading to my kitchen. That was the moment I immediately became aware that I had not woken up yet. I'm normally a lucid dreamer. Sometimes I get confused with reality in my dream, but gotten better with realizing whether I'm awake or not. The kitchen floor was filled with smoke or some sort of mist. You would understand this image if you've seen Insidious. It was as if I had entered the further. In my kitchen, I had a digital stove which also told the time. Being used to lucid dreaming, I was afraid, however, calm and aware. I looked at the time and it indicated 7:06 p.m. 7:06 p.m. during winter. Late November in Wisconsin is dark out. I could see the dark sky through my glass doors leading to the patio outside. However, I was not able to make clear of what I was seeing that was behind my wood patio due to the mist, but enough to know it was still dark. It was when I stepped a foot further into the kitchen, I heard the Mavu's song. The very first line, Num. Taxhab Pubu Li Ko. It echoed as if I was standing in the middle of an auditorium. At that moment, I raced downstairs in fear. Usually I'm very good at waking myself up to reality, but this time it was different. I felt as if I was trapped or someone was preventing me from succeeding. After many attempts to wake myself up, I was going to physically wake my real-world body up. At that point, I was willing to imagine everything possible. I was desperate and in great fear. I ran to my bedroom but was not successful in finding my body. I searched the entire basement and was not able to find myself anywhere. All of a sudden, my world blinked, and I woke up sleeping on my basement sofa. I was not awake in reality, but again in my dream. I was awake in my dream. However, I was experiencing sleep paralysis. I was screaming at the top of my lungs and attempting my best to move, but it was not successful. Seconds during sleep paralysis, I realized I had my phone on my right hand. I was stuck, sleeping on my left side where my right arm went over my left arm as it stuck out. I thought to myself that if I'm not able to physically move my body, at least I could move my fingers. With my thumb, I pressed the home button of my iPhone 7S, and it lit up a short distance from where I was sleeping. However, the light was low. Image turning on your phone at the lock screen in the dark. Experiencing sleep paralysis, I was not able to move my head to see what was above or around me, only a locked view of my left hand. I could see something very still in front of me. It looked like some black cloth fabric. My left arm that stuck out, and with only being able to move my fingers, I began to try and grab at the black cloth in hopes I would be able to pull myself off the couch. It was the moment when I touched the black cloth and immediately became aware that it was actually someone standing in front of me when that THING that I touched suddenly took a step back. I freaked out terribly, probably causing me to breathe rapidly in the real world. Suddenly, remember, I'm not able to move my head, so my view was limited at the very corner of my right eye. I saw blackish, messy hair slowly come down. I had never wanted to close my eyes so badly in my life. However, I felt as though someone was preventing me from doing so. For those who have seen foreign horror, Thai, Chinese, and Japanese films, you could probably visualize/imagine what I was seeing. The hair slowly came down all the way up to the eyebrows and had stopped. The skin tone was thin, and the skin color was a greenish blue, like it already had rotten. At that very moment, I was able to articulate that it was my mother. Seconds felt like minutes at that point. All of a sudden, a loud cry, a cultural/traditional crying for the dead, right at my right ear. What I pictured in my head while all of this was happening was my mother standing upside down from the ceiling up to my face, and then letting out that cry right at my right ear. The moment I heard that cry, I instantly woke up to actual reality. I sat right up in cold sweat, breathing rapidly. I was so paranoid I didn't even realize I had really woken up to reality. It was around 5:00 a.m. at that point. Shortly afterwards, it all felt real again. I realized that I had successfully woken up to reality. The entire dream still played in my head. I did not go back to sleep afterwards because I was afraid I'd get trapped again in my nightmare. The next day, I thought back to that dream still being able to play the entire dream as if I was still there. Till this day, I still don't know the real reason behind that dream, but I had gathered questions to myself. Maybe she had something to say. Maybe she didn't want me to wake up, which explains no matter how much effort I was not able to successfully wake myself up and waking up the second time to the same dream. Maybe the reason she didn't show her whole face was because she thought I'd be scared and had only shown enough to make realize it was her. Maybe she was sad and wanted to see me one last time. Maybe she wanted to thank me. Story 6. Poje Taksu. This is a story back in Laos that one of the Augs told me. This is a true story. If it was fake, then I wouldn't share, so please be respectful. I decided to share it with you guys because I thought it's scary. Hope you guys like it. Inoi. There was this young boy around 10-12 years old. His mom went to the farm and his dad was outside the house. They live not far away from the cemetery. The boy was sick and was laying on the bed. He was laying down and resting. Then he heard some voice like kids were talking behind their house. He peeked out the wall. In Laos, Hmong houses are made out of bamboo and woods. He peeked out and saw 2 kids talking and giggling. What the boy heard from the 2 kids is, "Hey, let's go and bother the kid inside the house." The boy looked at the 2 kids' face, and it looked so familiar to a cat face. The face was kind of hairy. Eyes shaped like a cat's eye. Nose, same thing as a cat. The ear was shape, and the mouth looked like a cat mouth as well, but it was big. The boy inside the house knew what it was. It was a Poje Naksu. Obtug, Poje Tuksug, came up to the door and looked at the kid as he was laying on the bed, staring back at the Poje Naksu. The Poje Tuksug asked the kid, "Hey kid, come out here. Let's go play." The kid knew what they were, so he refused to go. The Poje Tuksug said, "Hurry, let's go play." There were 2 Poje Tuksugs, so one Poje Tuksug said his parents are not home. "Let's just go inside and sit on him until he's flat and dead." The 2 Poje Tuksug stepped inside the house. The kid got really scared and yelled out to his father. Their house had 2 doors, one from the front of the house and one from the back of the house. His dad was doing something outside the front door, but he didn't see the Poje Tuksug. So when the boy yelled, the father got inside and said, "Oh, Poje Nuksug." He went outside and got some peach leaves and goat's legs. The father said, "Sov tam noka vokom nus tuag kiag mus." The Poje Tuksgogs got scared and ran outside to the cemetery. The father chased the Poje Tuksugs all the way and saw the Poje Nuksug went to hide behind the cemetery. The father went and looked, but the Poje Nuksugs were gone. Story 7. Case of the Ex. Yesterday, I saw my ex. She died in a car accident 16 years ago. She was pregnant with our child. It's crazy. I've been happily married for almost 5 years now, but you never really get over something like that, you know? Let's get back to yesterday. I just bought a new grill and was seasoning it. My wife went over to the market to grab some more food for the cookout we're having this weekend. I was in the backyard, but the door was open because I was watching television while prepping the grill. All of a sudden, I heard a crash from inside the house. I walked in, and a few of our glass cups had fallen off the kitchen counter. There was glass everywhere. I thought that maybe my wife may have left them too close to the edge, and I had the television on too loud. It made sense. While I was cleaning up the glass, the TV turned off. Honestly, it's pretty normal. It goes to sleep after so much inactivity. What was not normal was that I just walked into the house, so there was no inactivity, but its electronic and quirky things happen once in a while. I finished cleaning up the glass and walked over to turn the TV back on. That was when the doorbell rang. I figured that it was my wife, and she probably needed help with the groceries, so I ran over. I must have missed some glass because I cut my foot running to the front door. I was annoyed, so I stopped and sat on a dining chair to inspect my foot. The doorbell rang a few more times, but I didn't care. She has keys, and I was bleeding everywhere. The ringing eventually stopped, but she never came in, so I got a little annoyed. This woman really expected me to open the door for her when she had keys. I gave in and limped over to the door. When I opened it, no one was there. Her car wasn't even in the driveway. It must have been someone else, I thought to myself. I closed the door and headed back to the dining room. When I got there, every hair on my body stood up. My ex was sitting at the table. She looked exactly the way she did all those years ago. She was still pregnant. I was sad, but frightened at the same time. "You moved," she said to me. I was frozen. I couldn't say anything. I was afraid to say anything. "I came through the back door because you didn't open the front door. It was open. Why'd you move?" She questioned again. The only thing I could mutter was, "Sorry." The front door opened, and my wife yelled for me to help her unload the car. I turned over and saw my wife looking over to me. That's when my ex screamed, and the front and back doors both slammed shut. When I turned to look at my ex, she was gone. I ran over to the front door and opened it again. My wife was freaking out because she couldn't understand what had just happened. Heck, I still don't understand what happened, and I'm afraid it's going to keep happening now. I have no idea what to do. Story 8. These two ghost stories are my father's. During 1972, when my father was 11 years old, there was a man from his village who went to the front line to fight the Red Lao and the Vietnamese communist. He got killed in action and was brought back to the village. His funeral took at least 6 days. The man's body was badly decomposed. After the funeral, the man's family carried him to his final resting spot and buried him. He was buried close to the path that my father and his family takes to go to their chicken farm. The man was buried about a 2 to 3 minute walk from the path. His grave is invisible since there are tall grasses and bushes hiding it. My father's family chicken farm is about 15 minutes away on foot, where the man's grave is. Around 4 p.m. that day, my father, my aunt, my uncle, and their cousin went to the chicken farm to close up the chickens for the day. After closing up the chickens around 6 p.m. to 7 p.m., they began to walk home. There was also a Hmong family from their village who had a farm close by. As they were walking by, they saw that some of the family members were also closing up their chickens for the day. The sun has set, and it's hard to see people without a flashlight. As they walked past the other farm, in front of them from a distance, my father saw a figure of a man standing on top of the hill on the same path they were walking on. In my father's heart, he knew that it was the man who passed away at war and was just buried. My father then told my aunt, uncle, and their cousin that they should go back to the other Hom family and stay with them and go back to the village together. My father told them that there's a ghost walking up ahead on top of the hill, and it's probably the ghost of the man who was just buried. My aunt, uncle, and their cousins didn't listen to my father and said that they can just pick up some rocks. If the ghost of the man attacks them, they will just throw rocks at him. My father didn't want to go, so he stayed back to look from the distance. As my aunt, uncle, and their cousin made it close to the hill where the man's ghost was, the man launched at them. Scared, they all came back screaming and crying. My father lectured them for not listening to him. They then walked back and stayed with the other Hong family and waited for them. Soon after, they walked back to the village with the other Hmong family. When they got to the same spot, the ghost of the man was standing. He was no longer there. After that incident, my father never saw the ghost of the man ever again. Year 1975, towards the end of the Vietnam War. My father went to the chicken farm with his grandma to move the chickens to the mountain, where they have another farm where they plant corns and raise pigs. That night, everyone who had farmed close by all went home. My father and his grandma were alone at the farm looking after the chickens. That night, the chickens were making noises from outside. My father and his grandma woke up to check on the chickens. As they got outside and looked, there was nothing. The chickens were okay, and there was nothing out of the ordinary. My father and his grandma then went back to sleep. The second night, around 10 p.m., the chickens were making noises again. My father's grandma got up, went out to check, and saw a small figure by the chicken coop. The small figure was a few distance away, and with her bad eyesight, she couldn't really tell what the figure was. My father got up and stuck his head out the door to look. He rubs his eyes, and when he looked, he saw a Pog Nuk Sug. My father then told his grandma that it's a Pog Nuk Sug. At that moment, the Pog Nuk Sug tried grabbing one of their chickens. My father's grandma then picked up a small log and threw the log at the Pog Nuk Sug. It screamed as it got hit and disappeared into the night. My father and his grandma got scared, so they left back to their village the next morning. 2 days after, my grandpa and my uncle went back to the farm and found all their chickens dead. It seemed that the chickens were bitten and sat on to death by the Pog Nuk Sug. Story 9. Something freaky happened to me at my previous workplace a few years ago. At the time, I was working at a small nonprofit. I was in charge of a small women's group at night from 6 p.m. to 7:30 p.m. Even though my work building is located in the bad part of town, but that didn't really bother me. Until winter was approaching and nighttime came early. Because of this, I made my boyfriend come stay with me for my group meeting. He stayed in the office, hidden away from us, and waited for me. When I completed my group and all the women left, my boyfriend came out of the office and told me he was going outside to smoke. When he was done, he rang the doorbell for me to come open the door for him. A few minutes later, I heard the doorbell and opened the door for him. He was mad at me. He said he had rang the doorbell a couple of times and looked through the glass door. He saw me walking away from him. He said I was wearing a white sweater and that I walked into the back room of the office. He became confused and asked how come I walked out of another room and how come I was wearing a black sweater instead. I didn't say anything. I quickly went and grabbed my coat and purse, shut the lights, set the alarm, and we both left. He asked why I was in such a hurry, and why did I leave that lady in there. I replied that all the women had left, and he must have seen a ghost. The only co-worker I trusted at the time was another homegirl that worked with me. The next day, I told her what had happened. She has some psychic abilities. She told me something I had forgotten about. She said that the lady that my boyfriend saw was my boss's friend who had passed away a few weeks ago. She said that the deceased friend's husband had donated a few of her belongings to our workplace, and my boss had put them in the back room. She had a feeling that the lady was worried about her belongings and just went to check up on them. I freaked out. That's why people SHOULDNOT buy stuff at thrift stores. Spirits become attached to their belongings. Suffice to say, I quit doing the evening women's group after this LOL. Story 10. When I was a freshman in high school, I would always stay up late and talk on the phone with my friends until 2 or 3 in the morning, and sometimes end up falling asleep while on the phone or talked until the phone died. Before this, I had very few encounters with getting sat on. But this is the one encounter that totally messed me up for months to the point where I didn't want to sleep anymore. I used to share a room with my younger stepsister, but on the weekends she stayed at her dad's house. One night, while my sister was at her dad's, I was up talking on the phone with one of my friends, and we talked until almost 3 a.m. Side note, I had a little radio by the side of my bed that I used as an alarm clock for school, but always unplugged on the weekends because it was loud and annoying. So around 3 we said goodnight, and I fell asleep as soon as we hung up. I used to sleep on my side, and I'm an extremely light sleeper, so even the slightest sound would wake me up. While I was asleep, I heard some Taylor Swift music playing very quietly. I thought, maybe I might have forgotten to unplug the radio on before I fell asleep. I slowly opened my eyes to check if it was plugged in, only to realize the light from the radio was off. The music was still playing, so I thought maybe it was coming from my brother's room next door. I was immediately freaked out. I was going to run to my door to turn on my lights, but I couldn't move at all. I was freaking out, and my heart was racing. The music started to play louder, like it was right in my ear. Since I was lying on my side, I had my opposite arms under the pillow. I had a little gap between my arm and the pillow. I closed my eyes super tight and was too afraid to open them because I figured if I just went back to sleep, it would be fine. For some reason, maybe only a minute passed by and I opened my eyes again. In that moment, I couldn't close them anymore, and I felt something touching my arm. My eyes had adjusted to the donkus in my room, so I could see only what was in front of me. With little lights that was coming from the curtains at my window, I was trying to see what was touching my arm. I could kind of make out what was happening. A black figure's HEAD was slowing, rising up from under my arm until it was almost face to face with me. I was freaking out. I wanted to cry because I couldn't move, and I was so scared. I tried so hard to break out of it, but it was pointless. Then, for a moment, I stopped struggling and remembered my grandma and grandpa telling me to spit at whatever was bothering me whenever I got sat on. So I tried to spit at it, told it to go away, and all of a sudden I was able to move again. I got up faster than I ever have before and ran to my light to turn it on. I opened my door, then ran to the living room to find my brothers still up playing games. I asked if they played any Taylor Swift music, and they said no. Why? I didn't tell them what happened because I was afraid to talk about it. I ended up staying up until 8 a.m. and could not get that image of the black figure's head slowly rising out of my head. I told my parents about it the next day, but as always, they just said it was a bad dream. Till this day, 3 a.m. always freaks me out. If I'm asleep by 2:50 a.m., then I'll be fine. But if it's past 3 a.m. and I'm still awake, I will try to stay awake until the morning. Story 11. The Scratch. So this was my personal experience that happened to me. Right now, I'm 14 years old, and these things have happened to me ever since I was 11. They continued to happen over these past years, but only once in a while. This is the first experience. When I was 11, I was dating this young dude, but we had some problems and broke up. At that time, I was extremely depressed that it was all my fault. That's why I lost him. I always asked myself, when was I going to find someone who loved me and accepted me? Since it was my first breakup, I was always down and dingo things less cheerfully than I usually do. Whenever I sing a song, it was always a sad song, and I would cry along. My mother considered this as sieve. One night, I dreamed of me standing next to my ex. Then there was this other guy who came and said to me, "Come. If he doesn't love you, then come with me, and I'll love you." He then grabbed me by my left hand and took me away. But as we walked away from my ex, I woke up. That day when I was in school, I didn't remember doing anything to scratch myself. But at the end of the day, when I was playing with my pencil, I looked at my left arm, thinking about the dream. There were 3 scratches, and it didn't look normal. The scratches looked like it was peeled off. Usually, when I get scratched, my skin would turn white then red, and it would swell after a while. I used my pencil and scratched myself, but it left a red scratch mark. Then I went to my locker and scratched myself with it, but it turned white, then swelled. I thought this was strange, but didn't seem to care. When I got home, I showed my mom the 3 scratches, and it was more noticeable than before. "In Hmong," she said. "Why is it like this?" I replied, "Idik." I was playing with my pencil and saw it. She asked me if I scratched myself, and I replied no. I even told her that I used my pencil and locker to scratch myself and see if it matched the scratch. But no, my mom had this worried yet confused look on her face, but I was careless and walked away. That night, she was on the phone with my auntie and was talking about what happened earlier. My aunt said her brother was a shaman, so she'd contact him and ask him to see what was up. She gave her brother our phone number, so he could contact us about the information. When he called, he said that Irog Dab Shah Tu Shwag Id, how to write that in English, nor am I sure it's correct in Hmong. My apologies. He said he had hidden my spirit for an amount of time, so we needed to do Jingle Bell for me ASAP. My mother then started having these dreams of random people coming up asking about my name and dreams that guys are coming to marry me. My mom always woke up with fear next to me because I shared a bed with her. She cut peach branches and made an X on all of the doors and windows. She also made me the white and red necklace, but it was thicker and tied it around my neck. Couple of days later, I was on the computer and felt my necklace sliding off my neck as if it had broke. As I quickly yanked it, it caught on the back of my neck. I ignored the strange feeling and left my necklace alone. Minutes later, the same feeling occurred, but as before I yanked it and it was stuck. When my mother came back from asking a shaman to do the ritual, I told her to take off my necklace because it kept bothering me and felt like it was falling off. My mom shh me and said some people want to break your necklace. And I was like, who? She just said, "Sha, don't even ask." Then she cut off the necklace the following week and tied it under the kitchen table. She said it keeps me from going anywhere. About 2 months after those unusual experiences, we did the ritual. Everything was back to normal. My mother also wouldn't let me sing nor cry for those months. She had treated me just like a princess with that soft, assuring voice and even brought the food to me. Sorry that this was a long story. I'm sorry if you guys weren't entertained, but I just wanted to share my haunting experience. Story 12. This is a story that happened to my uncle a while back. They were doing a neeb for my uncle because he has a lot of things that will go on top of him when he is sleeping. He also talks to people in his sleep, saying things like, Oa Leos, Kavmam Rog Nesmos Os. Oh, okay. I will go with you guys. My uncle has a son named Tony, and he is also a shaman, but he just started, so he can't really control what he sees and how he reacts to seeing spirits. In the middle of doing the Uanig, we had the front door wide open and Tony went out for a smoke. He dropped his lighter and went down to grab it. He then saw a lady standing in front of him. No one else saw her but him and the shaman that was still doing Anib. At first, he thought it was just another cousin coming to help, but then she yelled at him, saying, "Why are you guys blocking our way? We are going to take him no matter what." Tony sensed something was wrong and he knew she wasn't human. Tony started to yell. He said, "You are not human, and you are not welcomed." But she started to laugh at him, so he got angry. The man who was still doing Uanig at the time threw his Texiab Neeb out the door, and it hit her in the head, and the Texiab Neeb broke in half. She left. Then when it got dark, and we were in the garage cutting up the pig, we heard a cat meowing outside. Everyone went out to see, and this wasn't any ordinary cat. It was a really big white cat with black and orange spots. It was not scared of us. It kept coming and rubbing itself on people's legs. We knew that it had to be the girl from before, so we just left it and closed the garage. Everyone left, and the next morning the cat was still there. We had the shaman come back, and he threw some red corn at it, and the cat ran off. Thanks for taking your time to read this. Any thoughts? Story 13. First of all, I want to describe the surroundings of which this story took place, so it'll be easier to understand. I live in this apartment complex, where the apartment surrounds both sides of the spacing ground/parking lot. Behind these complexes would be a wooden fence that would leave little spaces for gardening. And both these spaces would lead up to the spacing ground/parking lot, where there would be a tree and the light pole. Then from there, if you look both ways into the spaces created by the building and the fences, it would just be darkness because the building's colossal over the lights. And there, under the tree, we sat, as a common, warm summer night. My buddies and I stood out late, playing cards, chilling with only the thought of tomorrow's plan. As always, in every group of friends, there's always that one friend who would say stupid things without thinking. As the night grew old, probably about almost 1 a.m., one of my buddies spoke out saying, "Is it just me or tonight pretty cold?" But it was pretty common to have cold breeze blowing during this time of the night, and we all nodded our heads in agreement. Then that one friend spoke out of nowhere saying, "Or something is just here with us," followed with laughter, but everyone started bitching at him. Now, he had planted that into our minds. As we carry on playing cards, that one friend said he was getting bored and for us to tell ghost stories. We all careless and said we haven't experienced anything to tell anyways. Plus, we all said that that was a girl thing, lo. Anyways, that one friend suddenly responded, "Really? Nothing has ever happened to you guys? What if a body suddenly fell from the tree?" Then we all kind of freaked out with that picture in mind and yelled at him. Although it all followed with laughter, but of course, deep down, that would be very creepy. As minutes went by, that one friend suddenly yelled, "Oh shit, look above." We all stood up, panicking, and looked up with nothing. Bitch scared us, but again we ended it with laughter and scolded him. As time passed by, it was around 2 or 3 when we decided to stop and go home. As we parted ways, away from the tree, a loud thump fell behind us. We looked spooked and panicked to my door, looked back at the table under the tree, and there we saw a large body of clothes, although we were not sure if it's a body, but were sure that the noise is too loud and heavy to just be clothes, and we saw some hair float in the breeze. Even at those quick seconds, it felt like it was ready to get up and run after us, ready to snatch one of us. We got so scared, everybody ran into my apt. Unfortunately, my parents weren't home too, just my younger sis and my 2 older brothers. But after that night, we never again stayed at the same spot, and we cut down that tree. But something odd and freaky was that the next morning following that night, a black jacket remained on the table, which was unrecognizable by any of our friends and the apartments. Story 14. 5 years ago, when I was 20, I almost died in an accident. My family went camping at Yosemite. We camped next to a small lake with a small waterfall. Throughout the day and night, we would hear the waterfall. Around 6 p.m., we took turns jumping off the rocks into the lake. There were 10 of us swimming that day, including me. When it was my 3rd time, something happened. I jumped into the water feet first. Right when my head went underwater, I felt someone grab my leg and pull me down. I couldn't fight off whatever was pulling me down. I was so mad because I thought it was one of my cousins. I kicked and kicked until I felt like I kicked that person in the face. I reached the surface, gasping for air. I immediately looked around and asked, "Who's in the water with me?" All 9 of my family members were standing on the rock, waiting for their turns to jump. My cousin Toe asked, "What?" "You look like you were drowning, dude. Don't make excuses if you don't know how to swim." I was wearing an ankle bracelet that my boyfriend got for me. When I came out of the water, it was gone. I was so sad. Everyone laughed at me, but I knew what I felt. It was a hand that pulled me down. I told them I didn't want to swim anymore and left them. I told them not to swim anymore as well. Of course, no one listened to me. After drying off, I sat with my aunts preparing for dinner. 10 minutes later, all of the kids who were swimming came running. Some tripped and kept crawling when they couldn't get back up. The older men were outraged because the kids were screaming loudly and tripped over the pot of rice. Toe, the kid who was making fun of me, looked at me dead in the face. "My, how did you get here before us?" All of my aunts and uncles were like, "She got here like 15 mines ago." He said, "No, she was just across the lake." It was a small lake, possibly 15 F to cross. Mai was across the lake just smiling at us. We threw rocks at her because she just stood there and smiled, like just right now. We ran because Maui started laughing like a crazy pleased person. My aunts and uncle looked at me. I was scared. My uncle took me to the side, and I told him about the incident where someone tried to pull me under. But when I got out of the water, everyone was outside of the water. He whispered to me, "May I just admit that it was you for now? It's too scary for everyone, and it's too dark to drive home right now. We haven't eaten yet, too. I'll make everyone go home tomorrow." I had to admit to all of my cousins that it was me. I found a shortcut, and I ran as fast as I could before they could get there. My uncle was so irritated at us that night. Instead of lay dab the proper way, he just took some food and yelled out, "Legitu nojates is noj tufsum naj. Whoever wants to eat, come eat. Whoever doesn't want to eat, don't eat." And threw the food on the ground. That night, I slept in a 10-person text. All of our cousins are close. Boys and girls between the ages of 10-25, we all slept in the same tent. We didn't talk about that occurrence at all. Instead, we reminisced about the younger days and made fun of the younger kids for their boring childhoods. Then we were a popping noise and hiss. It was hard to hear because of the waterfall sounds, but we all came out of our tents. My parents flashed their flashlights around. My uncle yelled at them to stop flashing it in the random forest. My uncle asked where the pop come from. We pointed in the direction of our cars. He flashed his light at the tires. All 4 cars, all 16 tires were slashed. We only heard 1 pop and 1 hiss. He said, told all the younger kids to go back into the tent. All of the adults went to look at the tires. Clean cuts, mostly looking like a stab in each tire. My uncle was ready to punish the kid who did this, but we told him everyone was in the tent. No one left. A healthy-looking tree right next to my uncle fell down and almost hit him. Then the next one after that fell. Then the next, almost to 10 trees. I was scared shitless. I ran back into our tent, and I was like FTHISSHIT. I remembered hearing everyone arguing for a while, and then silence. It got too quiet. At this point, all the younger kids fell asleep, but I couldn't. I heard my uncle yell, why are you out there so far alone? Hurry up and go back in your tent." My cousin Tu and I looked at each other from the opposite sides of the tent. We opened the zipper, and both popped out heads out. Tu said, "Mai is right here." That's when I saw her. She looked exactly like me. She looked at me dead in the eyes and smiled, smiling from ear to ear so hard. She started walking towards everyone. I looked at her hands, and she was holding my ankle bracelet. My uncle suddenly started yelling at it. "Koji yog nije los yog dab. Kav tj kiav mustamkov muab koje tua nauje. Nyag and CJ mue kias nig. Are you human or monster? Hurry and leave before I kill you. You nasty thing." Tu and I zipped the tent, and I went to lay next to him. I curled my knees all the way up to my chest. Tu slept by the end, and I was second to the end. I laid next to Tu because I was supposed to sleep on the other end. BUTNOPE. Needless to say, we stayed up the whole night. Our phones had no signal, so we couldn't even call for help. Fortunately, rangers came to see if we had a permit for our fire, and we asked for their help. They were able to take my uncles to go buy tires and change our tires. We packed the shit out there. One of the rangers came up to me and said, "Hey, here's the bracelet you were looking for." I was like, "Do I know you?" He said, "We met last night. At the camp, 2 miles from here." I was like, "No. I was here at all times." He said they didn't make it to our camp to check for permits the night before because one of their tires popped. When he handed me the bracelet, it was MY bracelet. The one the creepy look-alike ghost was holding when she pulled me underwater. I was so scared I told him to throw it away as far as he could. When we got home, we had Anije and Huplig for everyone, especially me. I looked like a crazy-ass person after my family was done with me, with black strings around my neck, red strings around my hands and legs, even a black string around my waist. I was not supposed to take it off for a year. 5 years went by. No one had told us the reason to as why we saw a ghost that looked like me. I am writing this now because last night I had a dream about that ghost. In my dream, I was doing my makeup, looking in the mirror, and getting ready to go out. I moved my hand to comb my hair, but my reflection didn't move. I tried it again, and it still didn't move. Then my reflection started to smile by itself. The same creepy smile I saw 5 years ago. I was shocked. Even in my dreams, I could control myself. I cussed at her, yelled at her, prayed to God. and I randomly started chanting Buddhist chants that I had never learned and only heard of briefly. Then my reflections started to be me again. Next was like a movie, like a montage. I was laying in a casket while all of this was being said to me in Hmong. I came to you because of what he did to me 3 lifetimes ago. We were destined to be each other's spouse for 5 lifetimes. The first lifetime, he cheated on me. The second lifetime, he died of cancer. The third lifetime, I died during childbirth during the war. Please go see my great-grandchild I came to you because I was not reborn this lifetime, and you took my face. I woke up in my bed in the same position I was in my dream in the casket. I cried. My parents didn't know, but I drove to the house and parked outside of it. I thought about going in to knock, but I was like, how would I even know who the child is? Why would I even care to go look? The grandchild came out of the house, and HOWDIDIKNOWTHATWASTHEONE boy looked exactly like my boyfriend at the time of the incident. How did I know it wasn't my ex? Because my ex married a Mexican lady and they moved to Florida. I'm scarred for life. Thank you for always supporting the channel and welcoming its videos. Wishing you good health, and remember to subscribe to the channel to achieve 1,000 subscriptions.